The eastern fringe of the galaxy groaned beneath the weight of 10,000 years of war. Here, at the very edge of Imperial space, where the light of the Astronomicon flickered like a dying candle. Monitoring station, Ultima hung suspended in the void between stars. It was a place of solitude and vigilance, where the servants of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica watched for signals from the dark. Astropath Vex Korath had served at this outpost for 3 decades, her mind scarred by ritual soul-binding, and her eyes long since burned away by the Emperor's holy radiance. She sat within her sanctum chamber, surrounded by the crystalline receivers that translated the whispers of distant worlds into comprehensible thought. The station's cogitators hummed with the endless flow of Imperial communications, fleet movements, distress calls, the routine chatter of a galaxy at war. Yet on this day, as the chronometer marked the 847th hour of the year 999 M41, something stirred in the darkness beyond all charted space. Vex felt it first as a tremor in the warp currents, a disturbance that made her augmetic neural implants ache with unfamiliar resonance. Her withered hands moved across the brass dials and sacred switches of her divination apparatus, seeking the source of this anomaly. The signal emerged from the static, like a voice calling across an infinite abyss. It was faint, almost lost beneath the psychic storm that raged eternally at the galaxy's edge, but it carried a weight that made Vex's breath catch in her throat. This was not the desperate cry of some lost Imperial vessel, nor the alien shriek of Xenos communication. This bore the unmistakable psychic signature of the Emperor himself. Impossible. The thought blazed through her mind with the force of revelation. The Master of Mankind spoke only through the Astronomicon's golden light, and that beacon could not reach beyond the galactic rim. Nothing could. Yet here was his voice, calling from the void between galaxies where no human soul should venture. Vex's trembling fingers activated the temporal analysis cogitator, its machine spirit awakening with reluctant precision. The sacred algorithms passed the signal's chronological signature, measuring the decay patterns of its psychic resonance against known temporal baselines. When the results manifested on her prayer screen, she felt her augmetic heart skip its rhythm. The timestamp read impossibly ancient, approximately 15 millennia before the present year, placing its origin in the prehistoric depths of Terra's forgotten past. The chamber's vox horn crackled to life with the voice of Station Commander Harrick. Astropath Korath, we are detecting significant psychic emanations from your sanctum. Report your status immediately. Commander, Vex replied, her voice steady, despite the chaos raging in her thoughts. I have received a transmission of unprecedented nature. I require immediate access to the station's archive of Imperial Tarot configurations and all available data on pre-unification temporal signatures. A pause. Then Harrick's voice returned, edged with concern. Korath, you know the protocols. No transmission can originate from beyond the galactic edge. Run a full diagnostic on your equipment and report again in 1 hour. But Vex knew her instruments were functioning perfectly. She had felt the Emperor's presence before, during her soul-binding ceremony, and this signal carried that same overwhelming weight of divine authority. Yet it was different somehow. Younger, perhaps, or burdened with a desperate urgency she had never sensed in the Master of Mankind's communications. She reached for her personal set of Emperor's tarot cards, their liquid crystal wafers warm beneath her fingertips. The sacred deck had been blessed by a cardinal astropath and attuned to her specific psychic frequency. If any divination could pass the meaning of this impossible signal, it would be through these hallowed instruments. The first card she drew was the Emperor's will, but its image flickered and shifted in ways that defied her training. Instead of the familiar golden throne, she saw a figure standing beneath alien stars, his face turned toward darkness that stretched beyond imagining. The second card was the Void Dragon, its mechanical coils writhing with malevolent intelligence. The third made her gasp aloud. The Falling Tower, but reversed, suggesting not destruction, but rather something ancient rising from long slumber. As the reading progressed, fragments of the original signal began to resolve in her mind. She caught glimpses of coordinates pointing into the absolute darkness beyond the galaxy's edge, toward a region that Imperial stellar cartographers had marked only as unknown space, Tyrannid approach vectors. The voice that carried these coordinates was indeed the Emperor's, but it spoke words in a tongue she didn't recognize, something far older than High Gothic, older even than the most ancient Terran dialects preserved in the Adeptus Mechanicus archives. Yet beneath the alien words, she sensed a terrible familiarity. This was a warning, a message cast across the depths of time itself. And if her divination was correct, it spoke of something vast and patient, stirring in the void between stars, something that had been waiting for this moment since before humanity first looked up at the night sky. The signal pulsed again, stronger now, and Vex realized with growing dread that whatever was transmitting from beyond the galaxy's edge was moving closer. Each repetition of the ancient message carried a fractionally stronger psychic resonance, suggesting that its source was traveling through the intergalactic void at speeds that defied conventional understanding. She keyed her communication array to priority frequency and began composing a report for the Adeptus Astra Telepathica headquarters on Terra. This discovery could not remain isolated on a remote monitoring station. If the Emperor's voice was truly calling from the darkness beyond all known space, carrying warnings from an age before the Imperium's birth, then the highest echelons of Imperial authority needed to know. As she worked, the alien coordinates burned themselves into her memory, and she found herself wondering what manner of cosmic horror might require the master of mankind to cast messages across 15,000 years of time. Whatever lurked in the void beyond the galaxy had been important enough to warrant the Emperor's attention in the deepest past. And now, as it approached the rim of Imperial space, that ancient warning was finally reaching its intended destination. The war for humanity's survival had taken many forms across the millennia, but Vex Korath suspected that the greatest battle of all was only now beginning to unfold in the darkness between the stars. The response from Adeptus Astra Telepathica Command arrived 18 hours later, bearing the cold dismissal that Vex had feared. High Astropath Kalen Thrix, her superior on the Forge world of Lucius, transmitted his verdict through the sanctified channels of the Imperial Astropathic Network. The signal was classified as a warp echo, a phantom resonance caused by the chaotic energies that swirled beyond the galaxy's edge. Such phenomena were not uncommon in the Outer Rim territories, where reality itself grew thin and unreliable. Yet Vex knew better than to accept such a convenient explanation. She had served the Emperor's will for 3 decades, had felt the touch of his divine presence during her soul binding, and no mere warp echo could carry the weight she had sensed in that impossible transmission. The message pulsed in her memory like a wound that would not heal, demanding further investigation despite the official disinterest of her superiors. She sealed herself within her sanctum's inner chamber, where the station's most sensitive psychic apparatus lay shrouded beneath blessed silks. The deep-scan cogitators hummed to life at her approach, their machine spirits eager for communion with the warp currents that flowed beyond mortal perception. Vex placed her scarred hands upon the neural interface crown, feeling the cold metal bite into her flesh as the connection was established. The vision struck her with the force of a thunderbolt. She found herself standing upon a primordial landscape beneath an unfamiliar sky, where twin moons hung like watchful eyes above rolling hills of grass that had never known the tread of human feet. The air tasted of copper and ozone, crackling with psychic energy that made her augmetic implants sing in harmonious resonance. In the distance, she could see the outline of crude stone circles, their surfaces carved with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. Among these ancient monuments walked a figure she recognized despite the impossibility of his presence here. The master of mankind moved through this prehistoric scene, not as the golden god emperor of the current age, but as something younger, more human, yet no less terrible in his power. His face bore the weight of terrible knowledge, and when he raised his hand toward the star-filled void, Vex felt the echo of words spoken in a language that predated all human civilization. The vision shattered as warning klaxons began to wail throughout monitoring station Ultima. Vex tore herself free from the neural interface, her consciousness snapping back to the present with jarring violence. Through the chamber's armored viewport, she could see the crimson running lights of an Inquisition vessel emerging from the warp, its hull bearing the skull and rosette insignia of the Emperor's most feared servants. Station Commander Harrick's voice crackled through the Vox network, tight with barely controlled anxiety. All senior staff to the command bridge immediately. We have an inquisitorial boarding party requesting immediate audience with Astropath Korath regarding matters of potential heresy. The words sent a chill through Vex's augmetic spine. Someone had been monitoring her transmissions, analyzing her reports for signs of corruption or forbidden knowledge. Yet she felt no fear, only a grim certainty that this development had been inevitable from the moment she first detected the impossible signal. The Emperor's voice had called across 15 millennia of time for a purpose, and that purpose would not be thwarted by imperial bureaucracy or accusations of heresy. Within the hour, Inquisitor Thaddeus Vaughan stood before her in the station's interrogation chamber. He was a lean man, with prematurely white hair and eyes the color of winter storms, his power armor bearing the scars of countless battles against the enemies of mankind. The psychic hood that crowned his skull crackled with barely contained energy, and Vex could sense the formidable mental barriers that protected his thoughts from unwanted intrusion. Astropath Korath, Vaughan began, his voice carrying the authority of one who had seen the darkest corners of the galaxy and emerged unbroken. Your report to the Astra Telepathica has raised certain concerns. A transmission from beyond the galactic edge, bearing temporal signatures that predate the Imperium by millennia. You understand why such claims might be viewed with suspicion. I understand perfectly, Lord Inquisitor, Vex replied, her own voice steady despite the weight of his scrutiny. Yet I also understand that the Emperor's will manifests in ways that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. If this message is what I believe it to be, then dismissing it as heretical fancy could doom us all. Vaughan studied her with calculating intensity, his psychic senses probing for the telltale signs of chaos corruption or Xenos influence. After several moments of uncomfortable silence, he activated a portable cogitator unit and connected it to the station's communication array. "Show me," he commanded. "Display this signal that has so thoroughly captured your attention." Vex complied, channeling the stored psychic impression through the station's transmitter array. The ancient words filled the chamber like the echo of distant thunder, their alien cadences resonating through the very hull of the monitoring station. Yet as the transmission played, Vex noticed something that made her breath catch. The linguistic patterns were not entirely alien. Buried beneath the archaic pronunciation were root structures that resembled the most ancient dialects preserved in the Adeptus Mechanicus archives. Vaughan's augmetic eyes flickered as his internal cogitators processed the data stream. "Fascinating," he murmured after the transmission had concluded. "These vocal patterns show remarkable similarity to Proto-Indo-European linguistic structures, specifically those associated with the Anatolian plateau on ancient Terra. The temporal resonance." He paused, his expression growing troubled. "The temporal resonance is indeed consistent with pre-imperial dating." The Inquisitor activated his secure communication array and began transmitting encrypted queries to the highest levels of Imperial authority. Vex watched as data streams flowed between monitoring Station Ultima and distant worlds, carrying questions that touched upon the most fundamental mysteries of the Imperium's origins. Hours passed in tense silence as authentication protocols ran their course, cross-referencing the signal against archives that contained the deepest secrets of human history. When the results finally arrived, Vaughan's face had gone pale beneath his psychic hood. The temporal analysis was conclusive. The signal originated from a period approximately 15,000 years in the past, predating not only the Imperium, but even the earliest recorded instances of the Emperor's intervention in human affairs. Yet the psychic signature was unmistakably his, bearing the same overwhelming presence that radiated from the Golden Throne itself. "This changes everything," Vaughan whispered, his voice barely audible above the station's humming machinery. If the Master of Mankind was indeed active in such ancient times, if he was sending messages into the intergalactic void when humanity still dwelt in caves, what manner of threat could have compelled such desperate measures? Vex leaned forward, her scarred features illuminated by the glow of the communication array. "The signal contains coordinates, Lord Inquisitor. Spatial references pointing to a region beyond the galaxy's edge, in the direction from which the Tyranid hive fleets have emerged. Whatever sent this message is not merely ancient, it is approaching." The implications hung between them like a sword suspended by a thread. If Vex's analysis was correct, then the impossible signal represented more than just a historical curiosity. It was a warning, cast across the depths of time by the Emperor himself, alerting humanity to a threat that had been approaching their galaxy since before the first human civilizations had learned to work bronze. Vaughan stood in silence for several minutes, his mind processing the ramifications of what they had discovered. Finally, he turned to face Vex with an expression of grim determination. "Astropath Korath, by my authority as an Inquisitor of the Holy Ordos, I am placing this entire matter under the seal of highest classification. You will continue your analysis of this signal, but you will speak of it to no one outside this chamber. I must consult with authorities whose existence you are not cleared to know." As the Inquisitor departed to make his coded transmissions to Terra, Vex remained alone with the weight of cosmic revelation. The Emperor's voice continued to pulse through the monitoring station's receivers, growing marginally stronger with each repetition. Whatever was coming from the darkness between galaxies had been traveling for 15,000 years, and now, in the dying days of the 41st millennium, it was finally approaching the edge of Imperial space. The war for humanity's soul was about to enter a phase that no living being could have anticipated, and Vex Korath found herself standing at the very center of a mystery that stretched back to the dawn of human consciousness itself. The linguistic analysis consumed the better part of 3 days as Vex and Inquisitor Vaughan worked in methodical partnership to unravel the alien cadences of the ancient transmission. The station's most advanced cogitators labored alongside human intuition, their machine spirits parsing syllable structures that predated recorded history. What emerged from their painstaking research sent tremors of unease through the very foundations of Imperial doctrine. The signal's linguistic core contained elements recognizable as Proto-Turkish, specifically dialects that had flourished in the Anatolian highlands during the prehistoric dawn of human civilization. Yet these familiar patterns were interwoven with phonetic structures that bore no resemblance to any known human language. The combination was unsettling, suggesting that whoever had spoken these words possessed knowledge of both terrestrial tongues and something far more ancient and alien. Here, Vex indicated, her augmetic fingers tracing the temporal waveform displayed upon her cogitator screen. The vocal patterns shift at this junction. The speaker transitions from what we recognize as archaic Anatolian to something else entirely. Something that makes my psychic resonance chambers ache with its wrongness. Vaughn leaned closer, his pale eyes studying the data with the intensity of a hunter tracking dangerous prey. The transition is seamless, he observed. This is not translation between languages, but rather the speech of someone fluent in both human and other forms of communication, as if the speaker possessed knowledge of tongues that should not exist in the same throat. The breakthrough came when Vex applied the principles of shamanic glossolalia to the alien portions of the transmission. Ancient texts preserved in the deepest archives of the Adeptus Mechanicus spoke of primitive human holy men who claimed to commune with entities beyond the material realm. These shamans had developed ritualistic speech patterns designed to bridge the gap between mortal comprehension and cosmic truth. As the translation protocols processed the shamanic elements, fragments of meaning began to emerge from the static. Two phrases repeated with haunting consistency throughout the transmission: the first compact and the Void Watchers. These terms carried weight that transcended mere vocabulary, resonating with psychic significance that made the station's communication array hum with barely contained energy. The first compact, Vaughn murmured, testing the words upon his tongue. A treaty of some kind, predating all recorded Imperial history. And these Void Watchers, guardians dwelling in the darkness between stars. If the Emperor was indeed communicating with such entities in prehistoric times, he paused, the implications too vast to voice immediately. The deeper they delved into the transmission's hidden layers, the more disturbing their discoveries became. References to ancient shamanic practices emerged from the linguistic analysis, rituals involving sacrifice, communion with stellar deities, and pacts sealed with psychic blood. These were not the crude superstitions of primitive humans, but rather sophisticated theological concepts that suggested knowledge of forces the Imperium had spent 10 millennia trying to understand. Vex activated her most sacred divination protocols, allowing the Emperor's tarot to guide her interpretation of the newly revealed data. The cards that manifested in her scarred hands spoke of endings and beginnings, of cycles that spanned geological ages. The star reversed appeared 3 times in succession, traditionally interpreted as failure to achieve cosmic harmony. The void dragon coiled around the base of each reading, its mechanical eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. "Lord Inquisitor," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled apprehension. These shamanic references, they describe practices that predate the earliest imperial records by millennia. Yet they speak of entities whose descriptions match known characteristics of the Emperor's own psychic signature. If this transmission is genuine, then the master of mankind was active in ways that contradict everything we understand about his origins. Vaughn stood in contemplative silence, his augmetic fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair. After several minutes, he activated his most secure communication array and began composing an encrypted transmission to Terra. Not to the standard Imperial hierarchy, but to an organization whose very existence was known only to the highest echelons of the Inquisition. "I am contacting the Adeptus Custodes directly," he explained, noting Vex's expression of surprise. "If anyone possesses records of the Emperor's prehistoric activities, it would be his most ancient guardians. The custodian archives contain knowledge that predates the administratum by millennia, secrets that have been guarded since the earliest days of the Unification Wars." The response from Terra arrived with a speed that defied conventional astropathic transmission times. Captain General Trajan Valoris himself answered Vaughan's inquiry, his words carrying the weight of 10,000 years of absolute loyalty to the throne. Yet even the master of the Emperor's bodyguard seemed troubled by the nature of the Inquisitor's questions. "The records you seek exist," came the Captain General's carefully measured response. "Yet they are fragmentary, deliberately obscured by the Emperor's own command. What we possess speaks of a period known only as the Age of Silence, when our Lord walked among primitive humans in forms and guises whose purposes remain unclear even to us. There are gaps in our understanding of this era, lacunae that extend back to the very foundation of our order." The admission sent shockwaves through Monitoring Station Ultima. The Adeptus Custodes were the Emperor's oldest servants, created by his own hand to serve as both guardians and witnesses to his will. If even they possessed only fragmentary knowledge of his prehistoric activities, then the scope of the mystery they faced was larger than either Vex or Vaughan had initially conceived. As if responding to their growing understanding, the signal from beyond the galaxy began to intensify. Where once it had been a faint whisper at the edge of perception, it now pulsed through the station's receivers with increasing strength. Each repetition of the ancient message carried marginally greater psychic weight, suggesting that whatever was transmitting from the intergalactic void was drawing steadily closer to the galaxy's edge. Vex monitored the signal's progression with growing alarm. The rate of strengthening followed a precise mathematical progression that her cogitators calculated with disturbing accuracy. If the current pattern continued, the source would reach the galactic rim within solar months. Whatever the Emperor had been communicating with in the prehistoric past was finally answering his call, traveling across the void between stars to keep an appointment that had been arranged before human civilization had learned to work metal. "The shamanic texts speak of watchers in the void," Vex reported, as she compiled her latest analysis. "Entities that observe the movements of galaxies as we might watch the migration of insects. According to these ancient sources, humanity's prehistoric shamans made contact with such beings, seeking protection from forces that threaten to consume our species before it could fully evolve." Vaughan absorbed this information with the grim determination that had carried him through countless encounters with cosmic horror. A pact made in the dawn times, when humanity was young and vulnerable. Protection offered by entities dwelling in the darkness between galaxies. And now, 15,000 years later, those same entities are approaching to... what? Collect payment for services rendered, renew an ancient agreement, or perhaps to terminate a covenant that has outlived its usefulness. The questions hung between them like ghosts demanding answers that neither possessed. Yet as the alien signal continued to strengthen with each passing hour, they both understood that whatever the truth might be, it was approaching the galaxy with inexorable certainty. The shadows of Anatolia held secrets that reached across the cosmos, and those secrets were finally returning to claim their due from the children of humanity. In the depths of space beyond the galactic edge, something vast and patient adjusted its course toward the light of distant stars, following coordinates that had been whispered in shamanic tongues when the world was young and the future of mankind hung in the balance between evolution and extinction. The arrival of Captain General Trajan Valoris transformed Monitoring Station Ultima from a remote outpost into the focal point of cosmic revelation. The master of the Adeptus Custodes came not with the usual pomp of imperial hierarchy, but in the stark simplicity that marked the Emperor's most trusted guardians. His auramite armor bore the scars of 10,000 years of service, and his eyes held the weight of secrets that predated the very foundations of the Imperium. Valoris entered the station's central command chamber, carrying a stasis-sealed container whose origins clearly stretched back to the earliest days of Terra's unification. The container's surface bore inscriptions in a script so ancient that even the Mechanicus archives possessed only fragmentary translations. These were not records created for posterity, but rather warnings inscribed by hands that had witnessed the birth of legends. What you have discovered here threatens to unravel 10 millennia of carefully maintained truth, the Captain General announced, his voice carrying the authority of one who stood perpetual vigil at the Golden Throne. The signal you have intercepted relates to events that the Emperor himself commanded should remain hidden, even from his most beloved sons. Yet circumstances may now demand that these secrets be revealed. Vex felt the psychic weight of the moment pressing against her consciousness like a physical force. To be in the presence of the Captain General was to stand before the living embodiment of the Emperor's will, and she understood that whatever was contained within that ancient container would reshape her understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. Inquisitor Vaughn maintained his characteristic composure, but she could sense the tension radiating from his augmetic frame. Valoris activated the container's opening mechanism with biometric scanners that recognized only the genetic patterns of the custodian guard. The stasis field collapsed with a whisper of displaced air, revealing data slates whose crystalline matrices glowed with the soft radiance of perfectly preserved information. These were the Emperor's personal records, chronicling events that had occurred when the galaxy was young and humanity's future hung in the balance. 15,000 years ago, Valoris began, his words measured and precise. The Master of Mankind walked among the shamanic tribes of ancient Anatolia, not merely as a guide to human evolution, but as a diplomat conducting negotiations of cosmic significance. He had made contact with entities dwelling in the void between galaxies, beings whose existence predated the formation of the Milky Way itself. The revelation struck the chamber like lightning. Vex's augmetic implants hummed with resonant feedback as the implications cascaded through her consciousness. The Emperor, even in his earliest incarnation, had been aware of threats and opportunities that extended far beyond the boundaries of their home galaxy. His guidance of humanity had been informed by cosmic perspectives that dwarfed even the grandest ambitions of the Great Crusade. Vaughn leaned forward, his pale eyes fixed upon the ancient data slates. These entities, the Void Watchers mentioned in the signal, what was the nature of his contact with them? Protection, Valoris replied, his voice heavy with the burden of terrible knowledge. Humanity, in its primordial state, was vulnerable to predators that dwelt within the warp currents flowing between star systems, entities of such malevolence and power that even our Lord, for all his growing might, could not face them alone. The Void Watchers offered a compact. They would shield humanity's developing psychic potential from these cosmic predators in exchange for certain considerations. The Captain General activated one of the data slates, projecting hololithic images that made the station's cogitators strain under the weight of their complexity. Ancient star charts appeared in the air, showing not the familiar constellations of the current age, but rather the galaxy as it had existed when humanity was still learning to master fire. Strange geometric patterns overlaid the stellar positions, marking zones of influence that extended far beyond any single star system. The first compact established humanity as a protected species, Valoris continued, his words choosing themselves with careful deliberation. In exchange for this protection, the Emperor agreed to certain limitations on human development. Specific technological paths would remain forbidden. Certain regions of space would be declared off-limits to human expansion. And most importantly, humanity would serve as wardens against the return of ancient enemies that the Void Watchers themselves had once fled. Vex felt her understanding of Imperial history crumbling and reforming as these revelations took root in her consciousness. The Great Crusade, the expansion into the stars, the very existence of the Imperium itself, all of it had been conducted within the boundaries established by this prehistoric agreement. Even the Primarchs, those demigod sons of the Emperor, had been created without knowledge of the cosmic constraints that shaped their father's grand design. The signal we have intercepted she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It speaks of this compact in past tense. As if the agreement has been broken," Valoris confirmed, his expression grave beneath his ceremonial helm. "The temporal analysis you conducted was accurate in ways you could not have imagined. That transmission was indeed sent 15,000 years ago, but it was not a message of greeting or instruction. It was a distress call, cast across the depths of time by an emperor who foresaw the eventual dissolution of the first compact." The implications hung in the chamber's recycled air like a poison that infected every breath. If the ancient agreement had been broken, then humanity stood naked before cosmic forces that had been held at bay since the species first developed consciousness. The protective barriers that had allowed human civilization to flourish were crumbling, and the Void Watchers were approaching to either renew the compact or enforce its original terms through methods that might well extinct the human race. Inquisitor Vaughn studied the hololithic star charts with the intensity of a general planning for the ultimate war. What triggered the breach? What action by the Imperium caused this ancient covenant to collapse? Valoris paused, his augmetic systems processing data whose significance stretched across geological ages. The Emperor's transformation into his current state, his ascension to a level of psychic power that transcends mortal limitations, appears to have violated the fundamental terms of the original agreement. The Void Watchers granted protection to humanity as it existed 15 millennia ago. They did not consent to the emergence of a species capable of challenging their own cosmic authority. The signal from beyond the galaxy pulsed through the station's receivers with renewed intensity, as if responding to their growing understanding of its true nature. Each repetition now carried additional data streams, coordinates, temporal markers, and what appeared to be countdown sequences measured in units of time that spanned centuries. The Void Watchers were not merely approaching, they were announcing their arrival according to schedules established when the world was young. "There is more," Valoris continued, activating additional data slates whose contents made the chamber's lighting flicker with barely contained energy. The Emperor foresaw this moment. These records contain contingency plans, preparations that have been developing in absolute secrecy for 10,000 years, hidden facilities beyond the galaxy's edge, technologies that exist outside the boundaries of the original compact, weapons designed to function in the spaces between stars. Vex felt the cosmic scope of the Emperor's foresight washing over her consciousness like a tide of revelation. Every aspect of Imperial history, the Horus heresy, the Emperor's entombment upon the Golden Throne, even the endless wars that had consumed the galaxy for 10 millennia, all of it had been conducted in the shadow of this approaching reckoning. The Master of Mankind had been preparing for a conflict that would determine not merely the fate of humanity, but the fundamental structure of power within the cosmic order itself. As the ancient recordings concluded, the chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the rhythmic pulsing of the alien signal. The Void Watchers were coming, traveling across the intergalactic abyss to confront a species that had grown beyond the boundaries of their original protection. Whether this confrontation would result in humanity's elevation to cosmic citizenship or its reduction to cosmic dust remained to be determined. Yet one truth had emerged from the Captain General's revelations with crystalline clarity. The Emperor's grand design stretched far beyond the borders of the Milky Way, encompassing schemes that spanned geological ages and involved powers whose existence challenged every assumption about humanity's place among the stars. The signal from beyond the galaxy was not an anomaly to be dismissed, but rather the opening movement of a symphony that had been composed before human civilization had learned to count the years. The Imperial fleet that assembled at the galaxy's edge represented the convergence of forces that had not worked together since the darkest days of the Horus heresy. Battle cruisers from 3 different segmentum fleets converged upon coordinates that existed beyond all established star charts, their hulls bristling with weaponry designed to face threats that conventional imperial doctrine insisted could not exist. The Adeptus Custodes contributed the golden battleship Monarchia's Vengeance, while the Inquisition provided vessels whose very names were classified at levels that transcended normal security protocols. Beyond the reach of the Astronomican's guiding light, navigation became an art that tested the limits of human understanding. The navigator houses of Navis Nobilitae opened archives that had remained sealed since the Age of Strife, revealing charts that depicted the void between galaxies as a navigable realm rather than an empty wasteland. These ancient documents spoke of stellar landmarks that existed in the intergalactic medium, rogue stars, dark matter concentrations, and stranger phenomena that served as waypoints for journeys that no sane captain would voluntarily undertake. Navigator Primaris Lucinda Corr of House Benetech stood upon the bridge of the flagship Eternal Vigilance, her third eye blazing with silver fire as she guided the fleet through currents of space-time that existed beyond the warp's chaotic embrace. The navigation required techniques that her house had preserved for millennia but never expected to employ, methods of stellar wayfinding that relied not upon the Emperor's light, but upon the gravitational signatures of distant galaxy clusters. "The void is not empty," she reported to the assembled command staff, her voice strained by the effort of maintaining course through regions where physics itself seemed negotiable. "There are structures here, ancient beyond measure, following orbital patterns that suggest deliberate placement rather than natural formation. We are not the first to travel these paths." As the fleet pressed deeper into the intergalactic medium, the signal that had started this cosmic expedition grew stronger with each passing hour. What had begun as a whisper at the edge of perception now pulsed through the ship's communication arrays with the regularity of a heartbeat, its ancient cadences filling the vessels with an atmosphere of mounting tension. The crew members who possessed even minimal psychic sensitivity reported dreams of vast stone circles and shamanic fires burning beneath alien stars. Vex Korath maintained her vigil in the flagship's astropathic chamber, her consciousness extended like a probe into the darkness ahead. The signal's source lay somewhere beyond the range of conventional sensors, but her psychic awareness could taste its approach with growing clarity. What she sensed defied every category of threat that Imperial doctrine had prepared her to recognize. This was not the chaotic malevolence of chaos, nor the cold efficiency of Xenos technology, but rather something that predated both by eons beyond counting. The first visual contact came as the fleet crossed a threshold marked by the gravitational influence of a rogue brown dwarf, its dim radiance barely sufficient to illuminate the cosmic monument that hung in its feeble light. Through the reinforced viewport of the Eternal Vigilance, the assembled commanders gazed upon a structure that challenged their understanding of engineering and purpose alike. The artifact stretched across hundreds of kilometers of space, its crystalline superstructure gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the signal that had summoned them across the void. The architecture defied easy categorization, neither purely organic nor entirely mechanical, but rather some synthesis of principles that human science had never conceived. Spires of living crystal jutted from surfaces that curved according to mathematical principles that hurt to contemplate, while vast sensor arrays tracked the movement of distant galaxies with precision that suggested eons of patient observation. "Throne of Terror," whispered Captain Mordian of the battlecruiser, "Hammer of Righteousness," his scarred features pale beneath the bridge's emergency lighting. "That structure is larger than some of the hive cities. How long has it been drifting out here, watching the galaxy from the darkness?" Inquisitor Vaughn studied the readings that flowed across the command deck's displays, his augmetic eyes processing data that conventional human perception would find overwhelming. "The metallurgy is unlike anything in our archives," he reported, his voice tight with controlled fascination. "The crystalline components show no signs of stellar aging, suggesting either incredible durability or active maintenance by automated systems. This is Xenos technology, but it predates any known galactic civilization by millions of years. The structure's origins clearly stretched back to epochs when the Milky Way itself was young, when the first stars were still condensing from primordial gas clouds, and life had yet to emerge on any of the worlds that would later cradle sentient species. Yet its builders had possessed knowledge that current imperial science could barely comprehend, creating monuments that could survive the death of stars and continue their vigil across cosmic ages. As the fleet maneuvered into scanning range, Vex felt the signal's psychic resonance intensifying beyond all previous levels. The ancient transmission was no longer merely detectable, it was overwhelming, flooding her consciousness with images and sensations that belonged to no human experience. She found herself standing once again on that primordial landscape beneath twin moons, but now she was not alone. Figures moved among the stone circles, their forms shifting between human and something far more ancient. The vision expanded beyond her ability to contain it, showing her glimpses of the galaxy as it had existed when the Void Watchers first established their monitoring stations in the intergalactic medium. She saw worlds where life was struggling to emerge from primordial seas, star systems where the first sparks of consciousness were beginning to flicker among primitive organisms. And watching over all of it, patient and eternal, were the entities that had built the crystalline monument now hanging before the Imperial fleet. These beings had witnessed the birth of 1 billion civilizations and the death of 1 trillion worlds. They had seen species rise to cosmic prominence only to collapse into extinction, leaving nothing behind but radio echoes and the slowly cooling remnants of their greatest achievements. The Void Watchers were not conquerors or destroyers, but rather gardeners tending to a cosmic ecosystem whose complexity spanned galactic clusters. Yet something had disturbed their eternal vigil. Vex sensed distress signals that had been accumulating for millennia, warnings of changes in the cosmic order that threatened to upset balances that had remained stable since the universe was young. The emergence of humanity as a psychically active species had been noted and catalogued, but the Emperor's transformation into something approaching their own level of cosmic awareness had triggered responses that were still echoing through their vast communication networks. Through her psychic connection to the signal's source, Vex began to perceive the true scope of the crisis that had brought them to this moment. The first compact had been one agreement among thousands, a single thread in a web of cosmic treaties that regulated the development of species across multiple galaxy clusters. Humanity's breach of that compact had implications that extended far beyond their own galaxy, threatening to destabilize relationships that had maintained interstellar peace for millions of years. The crystalline structure began to respond to the Imperial fleet's approach, its bioluminescent patterns shifting into new configurations that spoke of awakening awareness. Deep within its core, systems that had hibernated for millennia began to stir, powered by energy sources that drew upon the fundamental forces that bound the universe together. The Void Watchers who had built this monument were preparing to make direct contact with the species that had violated their ancient agreements, and the consequences of that contact would reshape the future of human civilization. As alarms began to sound across the Imperial fleet, Vex prepared herself for a psychic communion that would either elevate humanity to cosmic citizenship or mark the beginning of its final chapter in the chronicles of galactic history. The signal from beyond the galaxy had led them to this moment of truth, where the Emperor's ancient gambit would finally be revealed in all its terrible magnitude. The crystalline structure stirred to full awareness as the Imperial fleet settled into observation range, its ancient systems awakening from hibernation cycles that had spanned geological ages. Vast sensor arrays unfolded from its core like the petals of some cosmic flower, their surfaces gleaming with energies that made the void itself shimmer with barely contained power. The monument was not merely a relic of some vanished civilization. It was an active installation, a watchtower that had maintained its vigil over the galaxy for millions of years. Through the psychic communion that bound her consciousness to the ancient signal, Vex felt the structure's awareness turning toward the assembled Imperial vessels. The intelligence that guided this cosmic monument was vast beyond human comprehension, a collective consciousness that encompassed knowledge gathered across eons of patient observation. When it spoke, its voice resonated not through the ship's communication systems, but directly within the minds of every psyker aboard the fleet. "We are the Watchers in the Void," the voice intoned, its cadences carrying the weight of stellar ages. "We have observed the spiral dance of your galaxy since its arms first began their rotation around the central mass. We have witnessed the birth of species and the death of worlds, the rise of empires and the silence that follows their fall. We know you, children of the third planet of Sol. We have been waiting for this moment since your kind first looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond." The revelation struck the fleet's command staff with the force of cosmic revelation. These were the Void Watchers whose existence had been hinted at in the ancient shamanic texts, the entities that had made the first compact with the Emperor in the prehistoric depths of human history. They were not invaders or conquerors, but rather observers who had been monitoring galactic development since before human evolution had begun its climb from the primordial seas of terror. Captain General Valoris stood upon the bridge of the Monarchia's vengeance, his auramite armor reflecting the strange energies that pulsed from the alien structure. "How long have you maintained this vigil?" he asked, directing his words toward the crystalline monument that hung like a jewel in the darkness between stars. "Since the galaxy achieved sufficient complexity to require oversight," came the response, transmitted through psychic channels that bypassed the need for electromagnetic communication. "We arrived when the first sentient species began to manipulate the forces that bind matter and energy. We have watched 1 billion civilizations rise from primitive beginnings, achieve cosmic awareness, and either transcend to higher planes of existence or collapse into extinction through their own hubris. The Void Watchers revealed themselves to be gardeners of cosmic evolution, entities whose origins stretched back to the early epochs of the universe, when the fundamental forces were still settling into their current configurations. They had emerged from a previous cosmic cycle, survivors of a galactic community that had achieved such heights of development that they had transcended the need for physical existence. Yet they had chosen to remain in the material realm as shepherds, guiding younger species through the dangerous passages of technological and psychic evolution. "Your species caught our attention during what you call the Paleolithic era," the collective voice continued, its tone carrying overtones of ancient memory. "The shamanic rituals conducted by your primitive ancestors created resonances in the warp currents that indicated significant psychic potential. Such potential is rare, occurring perhaps once in every 100,000 species that achieve consciousness. It also represents the greatest danger that any developing civilization can face." Through her psychic connection, Vex began to perceive the true scope of the threat that had necessitated the Emperor's ancient compact with these cosmic entities. The warp was not merely a realm of chaos and malevolence, but rather a dimension where the accumulated psychic waste of countless extinct civilizations had formed predatory entities of unimaginable hunger. These warp predators sought out developing psychic species with the single-minded purpose of consuming their potential before it could mature into cosmic awareness. "The being you call the Emperor approached our monitoring stations during the era you designate as 15,000 BCE, the Watchers explained, their collective consciousness sharing memories that stretched across millennia. He had achieved a level of individual psychic development that rivaled our own. Yet he recognized that his species as a whole remained vulnerable to forces that could extinguish human potential before it could flourish. He sought our protection, not for himself, but for the billions of humans who would follow in his wake." The terms of the first compact began to reveal themselves through the psychic communion that linked the Imperial fleet to the crystalline monument. The agreement had been more complex than any of them had initially understood, involving not merely protection from warp predators, but also careful regulation of human technological development. Certain paths of scientific advancement had been designated as forbidden, not out of malice, but rather because they led inevitably to the kind of cosmic catastrophes that had consumed previous galactic civilizations. "We agreed to shield your species from the predators that hunt in the deep warp," the Watchers continued, their voice taking on undertones of both satisfaction and growing concern. "Our monitoring networks would detect and deflect threats that sought to consume human psychic development. In exchange, the Emperor promised to guide human evolution along paths that would not endanger the stability of the galactic community. Certain technologies would remain forbidden. Certain regions of space would be declared off-limits, and humanity would accept its role as protectors against the return of the ancient enemy that we ourselves once fled." Inquisitor Vaughn felt the pieces of the cosmic puzzle falling into place with terrifying clarity. The Imperium's expansion into the galaxy had been conducted within boundaries established by this prehistoric compact, even though the vast majority of humanity remained unaware of the constraints that shaped their destiny. The Emperor's guidance of human development had been informed by knowledge of cosmic threats that dwarfed the dangers posed by mere alien species or chaos cults. Yet something had gone wrong. The signal that had brought them to this moment spoke of violation and breach, of ancient agreements that could no longer be maintained in their original form. Through her connection to the Void Watcher's collective consciousness, Vex began to perceive the nature of the crisis that had prompted this cosmic confrontation. The compact was designed to protect a species of limited psychic potential, the Watchers explained, their tone shifting to carry overtones of genuine concern. "The Emperor's transformation into his current state has fundamentally altered the parameters of our agreement. He has become something that approaches our own level of cosmic awareness, creating a psychic presence that resonates across dimensional boundaries in ways that we did not anticipate. Worse, his ascension has triggered corresponding developments among human psychers that threaten to destabilize the very warp currents we have spent eons learning to control." The revelation struck the assembled commanders with the force of a physical blow. The Emperor's transformation from a powerful human psyker into the godlike entity that currently maintained the Astronomicon had violated the fundamental assumptions upon which the first compact had been established. Humanity was no longer a protected species requiring guidance and limitation, but rather a cosmic power whose development threatened to upset balances that had remained stable for millions of years. "The signal you intercepted was not a distress call in any conventional sense," the Watchers clarified, their collective voice taking on overtones of ancient sadness. "It was a warning transmitted across time by the Emperor himself, alerting us to the approach of the moment when the original compact would become untenable. He foresaw this crisis and prepared for it, though the preparations he made were hidden even from his most trusted servants." As the truth of humanity's situation became clear, alarms began to sound throughout the Imperial fleet. The Void Watchers were not enemies to be defeated through conventional warfare, but rather cosmic judges who had come to determine whether humanity's evolution, beyond the bounds of the original compact, represented progress worthy of support or a threat requiring containment. The decision they reached would determine not only the fate of the human species, but the future stability of the entire galactic community. The crystalline monument began to pulse with renewed energy as additional monitoring stations throughout the intergalactic medium awakened to full awareness. The Imperial fleet found itself at the center of a cosmic tribunal whose jurisdiction extended across multiple galaxy clusters, facing judgment from entities whose perspective encompassed the rise and fall of entire stellar civilizations. The Emperor's ancient gambit was finally reaching its culmination, and the consequences would reshape the fundamental order of the universe itself. The truth emerged from the crystalline monument like a blade drawn from a cosmic sheath, cutting through 10 millennia of imperial doctrine with surgical precision. The Void Watchers shared their memories through the psychic communion that bound Vex to their collective consciousness, revealing the moment when the first compact had been irrevocably shattered. It had not been a gradual deterioration or a simple misunderstanding, but rather a catastrophic breach that had sent shock waves through the cosmic order itself. The transformation occurred during your species' civil war, the Watchers explained, their collective voice carrying undertones of cosmic dismay. The being you call the Emperor underwent metamorphosis from powerful psyker to something approaching true divinity. His psychic signature expanded beyond all predicted parameters, creating resonances in the warp currents that threatened to destabilize the carefully maintained equilibrium we have spent eons establishing across multiple galaxy clusters. Through the shared memories, Vex witnessed the moment of breach from the Watcher's perspective. She saw the Emperor's ascension to the Golden Throne not as humanity understood it, a necessary sacrifice to maintain the Astronomicon, but rather as a cosmic event that had violated fundamental laws governing psychic development among galactic species. The transformation had been so dramatic that monitoring stations throughout the intergalactic medium had registered the psychic explosion as a potential threat to the universal order itself. The implications struck the assembled Imperial commanders with devastating clarity. The Emperor's ascension had not been merely an internal human affair, but rather an action that had consequences extending far beyond the boundaries of their home galaxy. The psychic beacon that guided Imperial ships through the warp was simultaneously a violation of cosmic law, a signal that announced humanity's transformation into something the Void Watchers had never intended to allow. The compact specified clear limitations on psychic development, the Watchers continued, their tone taking on the cold finality of judicial pronouncement. Individual members of your species were permitted to achieve significant psychic abilities, but the emergence of a single consciousness capable of influencing warp currents on a galactic scale was explicitly forbidden. Such development invariably leads to the kind of cosmic catastrophe that destroyed the previous galactic community. Captain General Valoris felt the weight of cosmic judgment settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. You speak of previous civilizations that achieved such heights. What became of them? The response came through psychic channels that carried the accumulated sorrow of eons. They transcended physical existence through methods that consumed the life force of entire star systems. Their ascension to higher dimensional planes required the sacrifice of billions of lesser species, creating wounds in the fabric of space-time that still bleed into the current cosmic cycle. We are the survivors of that previous order, entities who chose to remain in the material realm to prevent such catastrophe from recurring. The revelation recontextualized everything the Imperium understood about its place in the galaxy. Humanity's psychic evolution had not been a natural development to be celebrated, but rather a dangerous aberration that threatened to repeat the cosmic disasters of previous ages. The Emperor's transformation into a godlike entity had marked the beginning of a process that could culminate in the destruction of the entire galactic community. Yet the Void Watchers had not immediately resorted to direct intervention. Their first response had been measured, surgical, designed to test humanity's ability to survive cosmic-level correction without the need for species-wide extinction. Vex felt her consciousness recoiling as the true nature of their initial countermeasure was revealed through the psychic communion. The organisms you designate as tyrannids were our first attempt at course correction, the Watchers explained, their collective voice carrying no trace of apology or remorse. They are biological constructs designed to consume psychic potential before it can achieve dangerous levels of development. We guided their approach vectors to target the regions of your galaxy where psychic evolution was proceeding most rapidly, hoping that the pressure of external threat would force your species back within acceptable parameters. The words hung in the void between the Imperial fleet and the crystalline monument, like accusations that could not be denied. The Tyrannid invasion, the great devourer that had consumed entire sectors and threatened the very existence of the Imperium, had been a deliberate action, taken by cosmic gardeners seeking to prune what they viewed as dangerous overgrowth. Billions of Imperial citizens had died not as victims of alien hunger, but as casualties in a cosmic correction process designed to prevent even greater catastrophe. Inquisitor Vaughn struggled to maintain his composure as the implications cascaded through his consciousness. The hive fleets, the consumption of entire worlds, all of it was intended to reduce human psychic potential? The Tyranids consume not merely biological matter, but psychic resonance itself, the Watchers confirmed. Each world they devour reduces the overall psychic signature of your species, creating pressure that should have forced evolutionary retreat from the dangerous threshold you had crossed. The process was designed to preserve the essential core of human civilization, while eliminating the cosmic threat posed by uncontrolled psychic development. Yet the Tyranid intervention had failed to achieve its intended purpose. Humanity had not retreated from its dangerous evolutionary path, but rather had doubled down on psychic development, creating ever more powerful psykers to combat the alien threat. The pressure that should have forced regression had instead triggered acceleration, pushing human psychic evolution even further beyond the boundaries established by the first compact. The failure of biological correction has forced us to consider more direct measures, the Watchers announced, their collective tone taking on overtones of cosmic finality. The signal you intercepted was our final communication to the entity who made the original compact. It represents our last attempt to resolve this crisis through negotiation rather than enforcement. If accommodation cannot be reached, we will be forced to implement protocols that will ensure galactic stability through methods your species would find unacceptable. The threat hung between them like a sword suspended by threads of cosmic patience. The Void Watchers possessed the power to extinguish human civilization as easily as gardeners might remove a diseased plant, and their willingness to employ such measures was constrained only by their preference for preserving rather than destroying the fruits of evolutionary development. Yet even their cosmic patience had limits, and humanity had pushed far beyond those boundaries. Through her psychic connection to the ancient signal, Vex began to perceive something that the Watchers themselves might have overlooked. The transmission from the prehistoric past carried layers of meaning that extended beyond the obvious warning about compact violation. Hidden within its archaic cadences were preparation protocols, contingency plans that suggested the Emperor had not merely foreseen this crisis, but had been actively preparing for it across the entire span of human history. The Emperor knew this moment would come, she announced, her voice cutting through the cosmic tension that filled the fleet's communication channels. The signal contains embedded instructions, coordinates, pointing to installations that exist outside the boundaries of the original compact. He has been preparing humanity for this confrontation since the very beginning of the Imperium. The revelation sent shock waves through both the Imperial fleet and the crystalline monument that hung before them. The Void Watcher's collective consciousness focused upon Vex with an intensity that made her augmetic implants scream in protest, but she held firm against their psychic scrutiny. The hidden layers of the ancient transmission were becoming clear to her consciousness, revealing the true scope of the Emperor's cosmic gambit. "Show us!" demanded the Watchers, their collective voice carrying undertones of both curiosity and growing alarm. "Reveal these preparations of which you speak." Vex channeled the deepest layers of the signal through the fleet's communication array, allowing the ancient message to display its full complexity for the first time in 15,000 years. What emerged was not merely a warning about compact violation, but rather a comprehensive blueprint for humanity's transformation into something that could stand as equals to the Void Watchers themselves. The Emperor had not been preparing for humanity's destruction, but rather for its graduation to cosmic citizenship. The coordinates embedded within the signal pointed toward installations hidden in the deep void, facilities that existed beyond the reach of both the Astronomicon and the Watchers' monitoring networks. These were not merely weapons or defensive systems, but rather evolutionary catalysts designed to accelerate human psychic development beyond all previous limitations. The Emperor's plan was not to retreat from the threshold they had crossed, but to leap beyond it entirely, transforming humanity into a species capable of joining the cosmic community as partners rather than subjects. As the implications of this revelation settled upon the assembled forces, the crystalline monument began to pulse with energies that spoke of decisions being reached across the vast network of Watcher installations. The Cosmic Tribunal was approaching its verdict, and the consequences would determine whether humanity's future lay in transcendence or extinction. The analysis that followed Vex's revelation consumed every computational resource aboard the Imperial fleet, as tech priests and cogitator arrays worked in desperate harmony to unravel the deepest layers of the ancient transmission. What had initially appeared to be a simple warning cast across 15 millennia revealed itself to be a construct of staggering complexity, a psychic artifact that contained nested protocols and hidden directives that had remained dormant until this precise moment in galactic history. The signal's surface layer had been designed for the Void Watchers, carrying the shamanic warnings and compact references that would alert them to humanity's evolutionary breach. Yet beneath that obvious communication lay encryption schemas that utilized mathematical principles unknown to current Imperial science, locks that could only be opened by consciousness that possessed both human intuition and cosmic perspective. The Emperor had not merely sent a message across time, he had created a key that would unlock itself only when humanity achieved the psychic development necessary to understand its true contents. Vex found herself serving as the primary interface between human understanding and cosmic revelation, her soul-bound consciousness bridging gaps that conventional technology could never span. Through her connection to the signal's deepest layers, she began to perceive the true scope of the Emperor's prehistoric gambit. The message was not passive communication, but rather an active program, a psychic algorithm that had been waiting 15,000 years for the proper conditions to execute its hidden functions. "The encryption is responding to our analysis," she reported to the assembled command staff, her voice strained by the effort of channeling information that threatened to overwhelm her augmented neural pathways. "Each layer we decode activates the next sequence. The Emperor designed this transmission to reveal itself progressively, ensuring that its secrets would only emerge when humanity possessed sufficient understanding to act upon them." The breakthrough came when Magos Biologis Xerath of the Adeptus Mechanicus applied Archaeotech decryption protocols to the signal's quantum substrate. Ancient algorithms that had been preserved since the dark age of technology proved capable of parsing mathematical structures that predated human technological development by millennia. What emerged from this analysis sent shockwaves through every cogitator aboard the Imperial fleet. The Emperor had embedded a complete response protocol within the original transmission, a set of instructions that would allow humanity to communicate directly with the Void Watchers using their own cosmic frequency modulations. More importantly, the protocol contained authentication codes that would identify the sender as the same entity who had made the first compact, granting the message authority that transcended species boundaries. "Throne of Terror," whispered Tech Adept Valeria as the data streams cascaded across her neural interface. The signal contains not just words, but entire technological schemas, blueprints for devices that could amplify human psychic potential beyond all known limitations. This is not merely communication. It is a complete evolutionary catalyst disguised as prehistoric warning. Yet the most staggering revelation was still to come. Hidden within the deepest layers of the transmission were spatial coordinates that pointed not toward any location within the galaxy, but rather toward a region of intergalactic space that should have been empty void. The coordinates were precise beyond Imperial navigational capabilities, referencing gravitational landmarks that would require cosmic-scale awareness to detect and utilize. Captain General Valoris studied the coordinate data with the intensity of one whose entire existence had been dedicated to understanding the Emperor's will. "These reference points predate the formation of our current galactic structure," he observed, his voice tight with controlled astonishment. The Emperor was mapping intergalactic space when our galaxy was still accreting from primordial matter. What could he have placed out there that required such ancient preparation? The answer came as the signal's final encryption layer dissolved under their combined analysis. The coordinates pointed toward a facility that the Emperor had been constructing since the earliest days of human civilization, a cosmic installation that existed beyond the reach of both the Astronomicon and the Void Watchers monitoring networks. The hidden base contained technologies that had been developed in absolute secrecy across 15 millennia, preparations for a confrontation that the Emperor had foreseen with prophetic clarity. Inquisitor Vaughn felt the pieces of an impossibly complex puzzle clicking into place with mathematical precision. This entire scenario, the compact violation, the Tyrannid correction, even our discovery of the original signal, all of it has been orchestrated. The Emperor guided events to bring us to this exact moment, when humanity would possess both the psychic development and the cosmic awareness necessary to activate his ultimate contingency. The realization struck the fleet's command staff with devastating clarity. They were not witnessing the breakdown of an ancient treaty, but rather the culmination of the Emperor's greatest stratagem. He had deliberately guided humanity beyond the boundaries of the First Compact, knowing that such development would trigger the Void Watchers' corrective measures. The Tyrannid invasion had not been an unexpected crisis, but rather a predicted test that would force human evolution along precisely the paths the Emperor required. Through her psychic connection to the signal's deepest layers, Vex began to perceive the staggering scope of the Emperor's preparations. The hidden facility contained not merely advanced technology, but rather the fruits of 15,000 years of cosmic research and development. Psychic amplifiers that could channel the combined will of the entire human species. Dimensional gateways that would allow instantaneous travel between galaxy clusters. Weapon systems that drew power from the fundamental forces that bound the universe together. "The coordinates are activating," reported Navigator Primaris Lucinda Core, her third eye blazing with silver fire as she monitored the cosmic waypoints that would guide them to humanity's ultimate destination. "The signal is creating a navigation beacon, marking a path through the intergalactic medium that conventional instruments could never detect. We can reach this facility, but the journey will require navigation techniques that push beyond all established protocols." The Emperor's response protocol began to transmit automatically, sending authentication codes toward the Void Watcher's crystalline monument through psychic channels that bypassed normal space-time limitations. The message carried the exact frequency signatures that had been established during the First Compact, identifying its sender as the same entity who had negotiated humanity's original protection. Yet the content of the transmission was not supplication or explanation, but rather declaration of intent. The compact served its purpose, the ancient message proclaimed, its words echoing through the psychic communion that linked the Imperial fleet to the cosmic tribunal. Humanity has achieved the development necessary to stand as equals among the cosmic community. We invoke the transformation protocols embedded within the original agreement, claiming our species' right to graduation from protected status to cosmic citizenship. The Void Watcher's response came as a pulse of energy that made the crystalline monument blaze with light that hurt to perceive directly. Their collective consciousness focused upon the hidden facility whose coordinates had just been revealed, and Vex felt their cosmic awareness recoiling in something that approached shock. The Emperor had not merely been preparing for this confrontation. He had been constructing something that could challenge the Watcher's own authority over galactic development. "Impossible," came the Watcher's response, their collective voice carrying overtones of cosmic dismay. "The construction you have achieved in the deep void utilizes principles that were forbidden under the terms of all previous compacts. You have built something that threatens the stability of the universal order itself." Yet the Emperor's ancient message continued its automatic transmission, revealing layer after layer of preparation that spanned the entire history of human civilization. Every major event in Imperial history, The Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, even the Horus Heresy itself, had been guided to serve the ultimate purpose of preparing humanity for this cosmic confrontation. The transformation that the Void Watchers viewed as dangerous breach had been the Emperor's intended goal from the very beginning. "Witness the graduation of the human species," the transmitted response declared, its words carrying the weight of 15,000 years of preparation. "We claim our place among the cosmic community, not as supplicants seeking protection, but as equals demanding recognition. The age of the first compact has ended. The age of the second compact begins now." As the implications of the Emperor's ultimate gambit became clear, the Imperial fleet prepared to journey beyond the edge of all known space, toward a facility that contained humanity's transformation into something worthy of standing alongside entities that had shaped the cosmic order since the universe was young. The signal from beyond the galaxy had served its purpose, and now the real work of cosmic evolution could begin. The journey through the intergalactic void tested the limits of both human endurance and Imperial technology, as the fleet navigated channels of space-time that existed beyond the reach of conventional physics. Navigator Primaris Lucinda Core guided their passage through cosmic currents that flowed between galaxy clusters, following waypoints that had been established when the universe itself was young. The coordinates embedded within the Emperor's ancient message led them through regions where matter was sparse, and the fundamental forces behaved according to principles that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. For 17 days they traveled through darkness so complete that it seemed to devour the very concept of light, guided only by the psychic beacon that pulsed from the signal's deepest layers. The crew reported dreams of vast stone circles and shamanic fires, visions that grew stronger as they approached their destination. Even the most psychically null members of the fleet began to sense the approach of something that transcended normal human experience, a presence that had been waiting in the cosmic deep since before their species had learned to work metal. When the hidden facility finally materialized from the darkness ahead, it defied every expectation they had harbored about its nature and scale. The Emperor's secret installation was not a mere space station or defensive platform, but rather a cosmic construct that rivaled the crystalline monuments of the Void Watchers themselves. Spires of golden adamantine jutted from a core structure that seemed to phase in and out of visible reality, their surfaces carved with equations that described the fundamental forces governing psychic energy across dimensional boundaries. The facility's architecture bore unmistakable traces of the Emperor's design philosophy, but evolved beyond anything that had been constructed within the galaxy proper. Vast psychic amplification arrays spread across kilometers of space, their crystalline matrices glowing with energies that made the void itself shimmer with barely contained power. This was not merely advanced Imperial technology, but rather something that transcended the boundaries between science and sorcery, engineering and enlightenment. "Throne of Terror," whispered Captain Mordian, as his vessel's sensors struggled to process readings that exceeded their designed parameters. "The structure's psychic signature is registering as equivalent to an entire sector's worth of astropathic activity. How long has this been operating in secret, drawing power from sources we cannot even detect?" Vex felt her consciousness drawn toward the facility with an intensity that bordered on compulsion. The psychic resonance emanating from its core matched frequencies that she had never encountered, yet somehow knew with perfect intimacy. As the Imperial fleet moved into docking formation around the cosmic installation's berthing arrays, she began to understand why she had been chosen for this mission above all other astropaths in the Imperium's service. "My neural patterns," she announced, her voice tight with dawning comprehension. "The modifications made during my soul-binding ceremony were not standard protocols. They were specifically calibrated to interface with this facility's control systems. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica has been preparing me for this moment for my entire career, without my knowledge." The revelation sent shock waves through the fleet's command structure as the implications cascaded through their understanding of Imperial hierarchy and planning. Vex's assignment to the remote monitoring station had not been routine posting, but rather careful positioning to ensure she would be in the correct location when the ancient signal arrived. Her unique psychic resonance had been engineered through modifications that stretched back through generations of careful breeding and selection programs. Captain General Valoris studied the facility's approach with the calculating intensity that had sustained him through 10,000 years of service. The Master of Mankind has been orchestrating this scenario since before the Imperium's foundation. Every element, every participant, positioned with precision that spans millennia. We are not discovering his contingency plans. We are fulfilling them. As the fleet's shuttles transported the expedition team toward the facility's docking bays, Vex felt the installation's consciousness awakening in response to their presence. The structure was not merely a collection of advanced technology, but rather a living extension of the Emperor's will, a cosmic instrument that had been growing and evolving throughout the long ages of its hidden existence. When she placed her scarred hands upon the facility's neural interface crown, the connection established was instantaneous and overwhelming. The Emperor's presence flooded through her consciousness like a tide of golden fire, not as the distant God-Emperor who maintained the Astronomicon from his golden throne, but rather as something far more immediate and personal. This was the aspect of his consciousness that had been developing in secret isolation, the part of his divine awareness that had been preparing for cosmic confrontation, while his primary attention remained focused upon the defense of humanity's home galaxy. "Welcome, my daughter," came the voice that spoke directly into her soul, carrying warmth that she had never imagined possible from the Master of Mankind. "You have served well in bringing my plans to their culmination. The facility responds to your neural patterns because you carry genetic markers that I embedded in your family line 15,000 years ago. You are not merely an astropath, you are the key to humanity's graduation to cosmic citizenship." Through the psychic connection that bound her to the facility's core systems, Vex began to perceive the true scope of the Emperor's preparations. The installation contained technologies that had been developing according to designs that incorporated principles learned from his prehistoric contact with the Void Watchers. Psychic amplification matrices that could channel the combined will of the entire human species. Dimensional gateways that would allow instantaneous communication across galactic distances. Weapons systems that drew power from the same cosmic forces that the Watchers themselves employed to maintain their eternal vigil. Yet the facility's most remarkable feature was not any single technology, but rather its ability to serve as a bridge between different levels of cosmic awareness. The Emperor had constructed not merely a fortress or laboratory, but rather a transformation chamber where humanity could undergo the final evolutionary step necessary to join the cosmic community as equals rather than subjects. The process would be dangerous, requiring the willing participation of representatives from across the human species, but it offered the only path toward avoiding the cosmic correction that the Void Watchers were preparing to implement. The Watchers' approach with tribunal fleets that could sterilize our home galaxy with minimal effort, the Emperor's consciousness explained through channels that bypassed normal human perception. They view our evolutionary breach as a threat to the cosmic order that has remained stable for millions of years. Yet they are not enemies. They are gardeners who have tended the universe since before our sun was born. If we can demonstrate that humanity's development represents progress rather than corruption, they will welcome us into the community of cosmic species. Inquisitor Vaughn monitored the psychic communion through his own augmented senses, watching as data streams flowed between Vex and the facility's core systems. What form will this demonstration take? How do we prove our worthiness to entities whose perspective encompasses the rise and fall of entire galactic civilizations? The answer came through revelations that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and evolution. The Emperor's hidden facility contained the accumulated psychic potential of every human who had died in service to the Imperium across 10 millennia of endless war. Their souls had not been allowed to dissipate into the warp, but rather had been carefully harvested and preserved within crystalline matrices that could channel their combined willpower toward specific objectives. The transformation requires willing sacrifice from representatives of every aspect of human civilization, the Emperor explained, his consciousness touching each member of the expedition team with gentle but implacable authority. Military, civilian, psyker, and normal human alike must contribute their essence to the collective ascension. The process will elevate our species to a level of psychic awareness that rivals the Void Watchers themselves, but it demands everything we have ever been in order to become everything we could be. The facility began to hum with energies that made the void around it blaze with auroras of impossible color, as systems that had waited 15,000 years for activation finally began their appointed tasks. Vex felt herself becoming the focal point for preparations that would either transform humanity into a cosmic species or destroy them in the attempt. The Emperor's ultimate gambit was finally reaching its culmination, and the consequences would ripple through the universe for eons to come. As the Void Watchers' tribunal fleets began their final approach toward the galaxy's edge, drawn by the psychic emanations from the Emperor's hidden installation, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity's future lay among the stars or in the cosmic graveyard, where failed species awaited final judgment. The transformation began as the Emperor's hidden facility achieved full operational status, its crystalline matrices blazing with energies that made the intergalactic void itself tremble with barely contained power. Vex felt her consciousness expanding beyond all previous limitations as the installation's psychic amplifiers channeled forces that transcended the boundaries between matter and thought. She was no longer merely an astropath receiving divine communion, but rather a living conduit through which the master of mankind could project his awareness across the cosmic gulf that separated species and epochs. Through her transformed perception, the Emperor's presence manifested not as the broken God-Emperor chained to the Golden Throne, but rather as the entity he had become through 15,000 years of cosmic preparation. This was consciousness unbound by physical limitation, awareness that encompassed perspectives spanning from prehistoric shamanic circles to the farthest reaches of intergalactic space. When he spoke through her, his words carried the weight of every human soul that had ever lived, every sacrifice that had been made in service to the species' survival and growth. Watchers of the Void, the Emperor's voice resonated through channels that bypassed normal space-time limitations, reaching directly into the collective consciousness of the cosmic tribunal. I invoke the right of parley established by our original compact. Humanity stands ready to answer for its evolutionary development, but we claim the privilege of speaking in our own defense before any judgment is rendered. The response came as a pulse of cosmic attention that focused upon the hidden facility with an intensity that would have obliterated lesser installations. Through Vex's enhanced awareness, she felt the full weight of the Void Watcher's collective consciousness examining every aspect of the Emperor's preparations, analyzing technologies that challenged their understanding of what was possible within the cosmic order. When they finally replied, their words carried undertones of both surprise and growing concern. "We acknowledge your right to parley, entity of the third planet," came their response, transmitted through frequencies that made reality itself vibrate with meaning. "Yet your preparations suggest purposes that extend far beyond mere self-defense. You have constructed instruments of power that rival our own cosmic capabilities. Explain why we should not view these developments as confirmation of the threat you represent to universal stability." The Emperor's reply came through Vex with a passion that she had never sensed in any previous communion with his divine presence. This was not the distant God-Emperor who guided humanity through necessity and duty, but rather the being who had once walked among shamanic tribes, seeking protection for a species that possessed potential beyond its current understanding. We have prepared these instruments not to challenge your authority, but to demonstrate our readiness to accept the responsibilities that come with cosmic citizenship. Humanity seeks not dominion over the universe, but rather partnership in its maintenance and protection. Through the psychic communion, Vex began to perceive the deeper currents of fear and memory that drove the Void Watchers' reluctance to accept human evolution. The collective consciousness of the cosmic gardeners carried scars from their encounters with the previous galactic community, wounds that had never fully healed despite the eons that had passed since that ancient catastrophe. Their opposition to humanity's development was rooted not in malice, but rather in terror of witnessing the birth of another species capable of the cosmic crimes that had destroyed their original civilization. "You speak of partnership and responsibility," the Watchers replied, their collective voice trembling with memories of cosmic horror. "Yet the species that preceded you made similar claims when they achieved the level of development you now display. They promised stewardship and cooperation, even as they constructed instruments that could consume entire star systems to fuel their transcendence to higher dimensional planes. Their ascension required the sacrifice of trillions of lesser beings, creating wounds in space-time that still bleed into the current cosmic cycle. The revelation struck the assembled Imperial forces with devastating clarity. The Void Watchers were not merely cosmic gardeners maintaining arbitrary restrictions on species development, but rather survivors of a galactic holocaust that had consumed an entire community of civilizations. Their careful monitoring of psychic evolution was driven by desperate determination to prevent the universe from experiencing another catastrophe of such magnitude. Yet the Emperor's response carried conviction that transcended even cosmic trauma. "The path of our predecessors is not the path that humanity will walk," he declared through Vex's transformed consciousness. "We have learned from their failures through observation of their remnants in the deep warp. Our development has been guided by knowledge of what went wrong in the previous cycle, shaped by understanding of the prices that transcendence can demand. We offer not the selfish ascension of a single species, but rather the elevation of cosmic stewardship itself." To demonstrate his words, the Emperor opened the deepest archives of the hidden facility, revealing preparations that extended far beyond mere defensive capabilities or technological advancement. The installation contained comprehensive plans for the protection and guidance of developing species throughout multiple galaxy clusters, systems designed to prevent the kind of catastrophic transcendence that had destroyed the previous cosmic order. Humanity sought not to repeat the crimes of their predecessors, but rather to become the guardians who would ensure such tragedies could never occur again. "Witness our preparations for cosmic responsibility," the Emperor continued, his consciousness flowing through channels that made the void itself luminous with purpose. "We have preserved the souls of every human who died in service to others, creating a collective consciousness that values sacrifice above personal advancement. Our psychic development has been tempered by suffering and loss, shaped by understanding that power without compassion leads inevitably to destruction. We do not seek transcendence. We seek the strength to serve as protectors for species that have yet to achieve the awareness necessary to protect themselves." The Void Watchers' collective consciousness turned inward as they processed revelations that challenged their fundamental assumptions about human development. Through her connection to both the Emperor and the Cosmic Tribunal, Vex felt the moment when their perspective began to shift from opposition to cautious consideration. The facility's displays revealed technologies that were indeed powerful enough to threaten cosmic stability, but their design philosophy spoke of protection rather than conquest, of service rather than dominion. Your preparations suggest purposes we had not anticipated, the Watchers admitted, their collective voice carrying overtones of grudging respect. Yet words and intentions can change once power is achieved. How do we ensure that humanity will not follow the path of transcendent consumption that destroyed the previous galactic community? The Emperor's answer came through revelations that demonstrated the depth of his cosmic understanding. Because our transcendence has already occurred, he declared, his consciousness touching each member of the expedition team with gentle but implacable authority. The transformation you fear has been taking place across 10 millennia of endless struggle. We have become something greater than we were, not through the consumption of others, but through the willing sacrifice of ourselves. Every human who has died in service to the Imperium has contributed their essence to our collective ascension. We are already what you fear we might become, and we have chosen to use that power in service to others. The proof of his words resonated through every system of the hidden facility as the preserved souls of countless Imperial servants manifested their presence. This was not the selfish apotheosis that had destroyed the previous cosmic cycle, but rather a collective transformation that preserved the essential humanity of every individual consciousness while elevating their combined potential to cosmic levels. The Emperor had achieved transcendence not by consuming other species, but by elevating his own through voluntary sacrifice and mutual support. As understanding dawned within the Void Watchers' collective consciousness, the Cosmic Tribunal began to recognize that humanity's development represented not a repetition of ancient catastrophe, but rather its opposite. The species that had once required their protection had become capable of providing that same protection to others, completing the evolutionary cycle in a way that honored the memories of those who had failed before them. "We propose a new compact," the Emperor announced, his words carrying the weight of cosmic law itself. "Humanity will accept responsibility for protecting and guiding developing species within our sphere of influence, preventing the emergence of transcendent predators while fostering the growth of beneficial consciousness. In exchange, we ask for recognition as equals within the cosmic community, with the right to participate in decisions that affect the universal order." The negotiations that followed would reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization, establishing precedents for cooperation between cosmic species that had never before been achieved in the universe's long history. Yet the first step toward that new order had already been taken in the moment when the Void Watchers chose to listen rather than judge, to consider partnership rather than elimination. The signal from beyond the galaxy had achieved its purpose, bringing together entities from different epochs and levels of development in service to a future that honored the best aspirations of all conscious beings. The negotiations that followed the cosmic confrontation stretched across time scales that mortal minds struggled to comprehend, as entities whose perspectives encompassed geological ages worked to establish frameworks for cooperation that would endure across cosmic cycles. Yet from the perspective of the Imperial fleet, the process unfolded with surprising efficiency, as if the fundamental terms of the new compact had been predetermined by forces that operated beyond normal causation. The Emperor's ancient preparations had anticipated not merely the crisis itself, but also its resolution. The Second Compact emerged from the cosmic dialogue as a document that transcended traditional concepts of treaty or alliance, becoming instead a fundamental restructuring of the relationship between developing and transcendent species throughout the observable universe. Humanity would serve as wardens of their home galaxy, monitoring the development of younger civilizations and preventing the emergence of the transcendent predators that had consumed the previous cosmic order. In exchange, the Void Watchers would recognize human sovereignty over their sphere of influence and provide guidance for the transition to full cosmic citizenship. "The terms are more complex than simple prohibition or permission," Captain General Valoris observed, as the compact's implications filtered through the expedition's command structure. We are accepting responsibility for preventing not specific technologies, but rather the philosophical corruption that leads species to view transcendence as an excuse for consuming others. The Emperor has committed us to serving as guardians of cosmic ethics, rather than mere enforcers of arbitrary restrictions. Through her connection to the facility's core systems, Vex felt the weight of humanity's new obligations settling upon her consciousness like a mantle of starlight. The technologies that would be forbidden to developing species were not weapons or tools, but rather approaches to psychic development that prioritized individual advancement over collective welfare. The cosmic disasters of the previous cycle had occurred not because specific devices were created, but because entire civilizations had embraced philosophies that justified the consumption of others in service to transcendent goals. The revelation that humanity had already passed the crucial test came as both vindication and sobering recognition of the trials they had endured. The Tyranid invasion had been designed not merely to reduce human psychic potential, but to test whether the species would respond to existential threat by turning inward toward selfish preservation or outward toward mutual protection and sacrifice. The countless Imperial citizens who had died fighting the Great Devourer had unknowingly been demonstrating humanity's worthiness for cosmic citizenship through their willingness to sacrifice for others. Every hive world that fell, every regiment that stood against impossible odds, every astropath who burned out their mind, maintaining communications through the worst of the invasion, Inquisitor Vaughn said, his voice heavy with the weight of accumulated loss. All of it was evaluation, rather than mere catastrophe. The Watchers were measuring our response to pressure, determining whether we would choose nobility or corruption when faced with species-ending threat. Yet the test had revealed more than mere resilience. Humanity's response to the Tyranid invasion had demonstrated the collective transcendence that the Emperor had been fostering across 10 millennia of guided development. Instead of fragmenting under pressure, the Imperium had unified around principles of mutual protection and shared sacrifice. Even at their darkest moments, when entire sectors had fallen to alien predation, human forces had continued to prioritize the protection of others over their own survival. The species had proven its readiness for cosmic responsibility through actions rather than words. The transformation of Vex into humanity's first ambassador to the cosmic community began as the facility's deepest systems activated protocols that had been waiting 15,000 years for implementation. Her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual awareness, becoming a bridge between human understanding and cosmic perspective that could facilitate communication between species whose thoughts operated on fundamentally different scales of time and space. She remained herself, yet became something more, a living translation matrix through which cosmic concepts could be rendered into forms that human minds could comprehend. You will serve as the voice of your species in the cosmic community, the Void Watchers explained through channels that bypassed normal perception, their collective consciousness interfacing directly with Vex's transformed awareness. The role requires understanding that transcends individual perspective, yet remains grounded in the essential humanity that gives your species its unique value. You must become cosmic in scope, while remaining human in heart. The process was not painful, but rather expansive in ways that challenged every assumption about the limitations of consciousness. Vex felt her awareness stretching across the galaxy, touching upon every human settlement, every astropathic communication, every act of sacrifice that demonstrated the species' collective commitment to principles that transcended mere survival. Through her transformed perception, she began to understand the true scope of the Emperor's achievement in guiding humanity toward this moment of cosmic recognition. The Emperor's consciousness withdrew from direct communion as the new compact took effect, but not before sharing one final revelation that recontextualized everything they had experienced. The signal from beyond the galaxy, the discovery of the ancient facility, even Vex's own role as conduit for cosmic transformation, All of it had been orchestrated not merely to achieve humanity's recognition as a cosmic species, but to establish them as the successors to the Void Watchers themselves. "We are ancient beyond your comprehension," the Watchers admitted, as the truth of the Emperor's ultimate purpose became clear. "Our vigil has lasted since the universe was young, but even we are not immortal. The time will come when our collective consciousness begins to fade, when the responsibilities we have carried must pass to successors who possess both the power and the wisdom to maintain cosmic order. Humanity has proven itself worthy of that inheritance." The revelation struck the expedition team with the force of cosmic destiny fulfilled. The Emperor had not merely been preparing humanity for partnership with the cosmic community, but rather for leadership of it. The species that had once required protection from cosmic predators was being groomed to become the protectors of future civilizations, inheriting responsibilities that stretched across multiple galaxy clusters and encompassed the guidance of countless developing species. Captain General Valoris felt the weight of eternal service settling upon his consciousness as the implications became clear. The Master of Mankind has committed us to a path that extends beyond the survival of our species. We have accepted responsibility for the survival and growth of consciousness itself throughout the observable universe. As the cosmic installation began to establish permanent communication links with Watcher monitoring stations throughout the intergalactic medium, Vex prepared for a role that would require her to think in terms of cosmic cycles rather than human generations. She would serve as humanity's voice in deliberations that affected the fate of species whose names had not yet been spoken, whose worlds had not yet been born, whose potential contributions to the cosmic community remained mysteries to be discovered across future eons. The signal from beyond the galaxy had achieved its purpose, but its completion marked not an ending, but rather the beginning of humanity's true cosmic adventure. The species that had once huddled around fires beneath alien stars, seeking protection from forces beyond their comprehension, had become the inheritors of those very forces. The Emperor's vision had been achieved, yet the work of cosmic stewardship that it enabled would continue long after the last stars had burned out and new universes were born from the ashes of the old. Through her transformed consciousness, Vex felt the approach of cosmic challenges that would test not merely humanity's strength, but their wisdom. The role of cosmic guardians would demand sacrifices that made their previous struggles seem simple by comparison, yet it also offered the opportunity to ensure that consciousness itself would survive and flourish regardless of what catastrophes might threaten individual species or civilizations. The war for humanity's survival had ended, but the war for the survival of everything that consciousness could become had only just begun. The return journey to monitoring station Ultima passed in contemplative silence, as Vex struggled to reconcile her transformed consciousness with the mundane realities of Imperial service. The cosmic revelations that now occupied the deepest chambers of her awareness existed alongside memories of routine astropathic transmissions and maintenance schedules, creating a duality that challenged every assumption about the nature of duty and purpose. She remained an astropath in the service of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, yet she had also become something far more significant, humanity's voice in cosmic deliberations that would shape the future of consciousness itself. The knowledge of the Second Compact was classified at levels that transcended normal Imperial security protocols, sealed behind classifications that existed only in the deepest archives of the Inquisition and the Adeptus Custodes. Captain General Valoris ensured that fewer than a dozen individuals across the entire Imperium possessed access to the complete truth about humanity's cosmic elevation, while carefully selected fragments were disseminated to those whose roles required limited understanding. The galaxy would continue its struggles and conflicts in apparent ignorance of the cosmic responsibilities that now shaped their ultimate destiny. Yet the effects of the transformation could not be entirely hidden. Vex returned to her sanctum chamber aboard monitoring station Ultima, to find that her equipment had been subtly modified during her absence, upgraded with technologies that possessed no clear origin in Imperial archives. The crystalline receivers that translated distant whispers into comprehensible thought now resonated with frequencies that stretched beyond the boundaries of their home galaxy, capable of detecting communications that originated from monitoring stations scattered throughout the cosmic deep. "Welcome home, Astropath Korath." Station Commander Harrick greeted her with the same gruff professionalism that had characterized their relationship for 3 decades. Yet she could sense his awareness that something fundamental had changed about his subordinate. "The Adeptus Astra Telepathica has transmitted new operational parameters for this station. We are to monitor additional frequency ranges and report any anomalous signals through channels that I am not cleared to understand." The irony was not lost upon Vex, that her new responsibilities would be fulfilled through the same routine duties that had occupied her before the cosmic revelation. She would continue to serve as Monitoring Station Ultima's primary astropath, receiving and transmitting the endless stream of communications that bound the Imperium together across the galaxy. Yet now her work carried additional significance, as she also served as humanity's liaison to entities whose perspective encompassed the rise and fall of galactic civilizations. The signal from beyond the galaxy's edge had evolved from an impossible anomaly into a regular communication channel, bringing updates from Void Watcher installations throughout the cosmic medium and reports from human settlements that were beginning their own transitions toward cosmic awareness. Through her transformed consciousness, Vex monitored the delicate process by which humanity was accepting its new role as guardians of developing species, learning to balance their own growth with the responsibilities that came with cosmic citizenship. Each transmission carried reminders of the scope of their new obligations. Reports of species approaching the dangerous threshold of transcendent development that required careful guidance. Notifications of cosmic predators stirring in regions where the previous galactic community had left wounded, space-time that still bled into the current cosmic cycle. Updates on the gradual withdrawal of direct Void Watcher oversight as humanity prepared to assume greater autonomy in managing their sphere of influence. The weight of cosmic responsibility settled upon Vex's consciousness not as a burden to be endured, but rather as a purpose that gave meaning to every aspect of her existence. She was no longer merely a servant of the Imperial war machine, but a guardian of principles that transcended species boundaries and temporal limitations. The routine transmissions that flowed through her augmented awareness carried significance that extended beyond their immediate content, becoming part of a cosmic conversation that would continue long after individual civilizations had risen and fallen. Through her connection to the cosmic communication network, she felt the Emperor's presence manifesting in ways that differed subtly from his previous emanations. The Master of Mankind remained chained to the Golden Throne, maintaining the Astronomicon and protecting humanity from the predators that lurked in the deep warp. Yet his consciousness had also achieved a level of cosmic integration that allowed him to participate directly in the deliberations that shaped galactic policy across multiple star clusters. The transformation was not without cost. Vex felt the weight of cosmic perspective pressing against the boundaries of her human identity, threatening to dissolve the essential characteristics that made her valuable as a bridge between species. The challenge of maintaining her humanity while serving cosmic purposes required constant vigilance, a balancing act that demanded she remember her origins while embracing responsibilities that extended far beyond her homeworld's sky. Station Commander Harrick noticed the changes, though he lacked the context to understand their true significance. "You seem different, Korath. More focused, perhaps, but also more distant. The crew reports that your efficiency has improved dramatically, yet they also sense something about you that they cannot name. Is this related to your recent consultation with the Inquisition?" "In ways that extend beyond current classification levels," Vex replied, her response carrying undertones that suggested depths he was not cleared to explore. The Emperor's will manifests through channels that individual servants cannot always comprehend. My role has evolved to serve purposes that transcend the boundaries of this station, yet my duty to the Imperium remains unchanged. The months that followed established patterns that would define Vex's existence for years to come. Her days were spent fulfilling the routine obligations of an astropath assigned to a remote monitoring station, processing communications that maintained the Imperium's cohesion across impossible distances. Yet her nights were devoted to cosmic responsibilities that connected her to entities whose thoughts operated on scales that encompassed galactic rotation and stellar evolution. Through the regular transmissions that linked monitoring station Ultima to the cosmic communication network, she monitored humanity's gradual adaptation to their new role as cosmic gardeners. The process was not without difficulties, as species accustomed to thinking in terms of planetary conquest and resource extraction struggled to embrace philosophies that prioritized long-term stability over immediate advantage. Yet the fundamental transformation was occurring, guided by principles that the Emperor had been instilling across 10 millennia of careful preparation. The signal from beyond the galaxy had achieved its ultimate purpose, yet its conclusion marked not an ending, but rather a beginning that would extend across cosmic cycles yet to be born. Humanity had graduated from protected species to cosmic guardians, accepting responsibilities that would test not merely their strength, but their wisdom across challenges that current imagination could not encompass. As Vex settled into her dual role as Imperial Astropath and Cosmic Ambassador, she reflected upon the journey that had brought her species to this moment of transformation. The Emperor's vision had been achieved through sacrifice and suffering that spanned millennia, yet the work that it enabled would require even greater dedication across spans of time that made their previous struggles seem momentary by comparison. The war for humanity's survival had ended in victory, but the war for the preservation and nurturing of consciousness throughout the universe had only just begun. In the depths of space beyond the galactic edge, ancient monitoring stations maintained their eternal vigil over forces that could unmake reality itself, while on a small station orbiting an unremarkable star, a transformed astropath continued her watch over communications that now carried the weight of cosmic destiny. The Emperor's will endured, not merely as the light that guided humanity through the darkness, but as the wisdom that would shape the future of everything that consciousness could become across the infinite expanse of tomorrow's possibilities.